All right, let's talk about adaptive swarm usage. So really, for adaptive swarm, you really just want to be pressing it as much as possible. Like even here, ideally I start the pull off in stealth, but I can even just throw adaptive swarm on myself here at the very start before we even start the pull, and then by the time we get into the pull and start pulling, it's going to bounce off of me and onto a mob, which is great. Oh man, these are going to hurt a lot. The whole purpose of Adaptive Swarm is really just to utilize it as much as possible. So here it's off cooldown. I'm just going to find a target that doesn't have Adaptive Swarm on it. It doesn't matter if it's an ally or an enemy, and we're just going to throw Adaptive Swarm on them. Again, it does not matter really if it's an ally or an enemy, because once you press Adaptive Swarm, it kind of does all the work for you. There is like a weak aura that I'll link in the description. I don't personally use it because I just don't find it necessary. But it helps you like really min-max the use, especially on single target, which definitely is useful. So here I have Adaptive Swarm back up, and we're just throwing it on something that doesn't have it. So I just threw it on this Groundskeeper. Nothing specific. Could have been me, it could have been a Groundskeeper. It doesn't really matter. The point is using the ability as much as possible on cooldown, and then using it on a target that doesn't already have Adaptive Swarm on it. That's all that matters. So you just need to track Adaptive Swarm on allies and enemies, and then you're good to go. And like here, for example, it's back up. I'm just going to throw it on myself as we're running over to the next pull. And if we don't get into the next pull in time and my debuff falls off, it'll just pick an ally to go on to. But here it bounces on an enemy. And then in between adaptive swarms, we want to be applying as many dots as we possibly can. It is Grievous this week, so you do have to bear in mind that I'm not going to be able to apply as many as many dots as we might like to, but the intention still remains the same. The goal is adaptive swarm as much as possible, and then utilize Sunfire, Moonfire, and your Catform Rake if you're playing Catform, which you should be if you're playing Necrolord. That is how you min-max your damage. So here I apply my dots back on the mobs because these adaptive swarms are going to go on them. I can adaptive swarm the Gargan here. And it is Sanguine week, so like you could argue that it's definitely better to just go balance with affinity this week, even if you're gonna play Necrolord, just for the utility, especially in pugs. Which I would probably agree with that for most cases, unless we're doing like higher keys and I'm with a group that I can kind of trust to keep out of, keep mobs out of Sanguine. Or we could just play Night Fae this week pretty much as balance affinity. That would be fine too. So here I can throw Adaptive Swarm on myself and then stealth into cat form. And then hopefully we go in at some point. I think he's getting a food buff. There we go. And then I apply what dots I can. Obviously healing is my main priority. Can't dispel that curse because I need to wait for the collect sins or the siphon life. But now again we have adaptive storm back up, so I just throw it on a random mob. I just pick the obliterator because he doesn't have the debuff already. Go ahead and trank here. And then we'll reapply dots here in a second. Especially now that we can rely on to do a lot of our healing. So there, what you saw happen was I used Adaptive Swarm, but at the same time, one of the Adaptive Swarms fell off my ally and went on the Shard, which isn't the end of the world. It's fine when that happens. Like, if your Swarm overlaps on top of another Swarm, it just resets it to 5 stacks, typically, which is the maximum amount of stacks one target can have. So here the Shard gets hit with it, so this time I'm going to target myself. And again, the whole goal is just to keep as many adaptive swarms bouncing around as you possibly can. That's literally the whole point of this ability, is just to keep as many adaptive swarms active as possible. Like right now we have a ton of adaptive swarms out, so if we can quickly get to another pull to do, it's going to be really beneficial because all of these adaptive swarms will start bouncing on the mobs rather than just on us, like right now where they're kind of getting wasted. Yeah, I was going to say, this definitely gets pulled. So see, now they both get Adaptive Swarm. It fell off of us, so we're going to press it on ourselves again. Looks like we're just still running, so I'm going to keep running as well. Start dotting stuff up while we have some downtime to do damage. And we have Adaptive Swarm coming back up. I can dispel this curse because there's no collector. Throw Adaptive Swarm on a random groundskeeper. And you can min-max the target selection by picking like the highest health target or the target that needs to die the fastest, stuff like that, as long as, again, they don't already have Adaptive Swarm on them. The only time you want to use Adaptive Swarm on a target that already has it is if it's a really big priority target and then you want Adaptive Swarm uptime like 100% of the time that it's alive, or for like a boss, for example, which we're going to show examples of that when we get to the bosses here. Adaptive Swarm is back up. I'll literally just throw it on myself. And then we go right back into the motions of doing damage or healing, depending on what we need. Reapply dots. And we do have Adaptive Swarm coming back up soon, so we'll probably just use it on ourselves again, since it just fell off of us. Now it went back on us, so we can just use it on a different party member. I'll just throw it on the rogue. Looks like we're trying to skip this, so I will root it when the Houndmaster gets up here to the top. And I'll go ahead and root it right about now. Adaptive Swarm is back up, so I will throw it on the Brewmaster Monk. And then watch as we go into this pull. All these Adaptive Swarms are falling off my allies, and now look how many Adaptive Swarms are already active on the mobs that we're fighting. And that's where you get a huge advantage as Resto Druid, is if you can make it to where right when you go into a big pull like this, you already have like, you know, 3, 4, or even 5 Adaptive Swarms out on the mobs. And it just gives you so much passive damage, especially if you can keep up with just simply pressing like Sunfire and Moonfire on targets. So here we Adaptive Swarm the Shard, because it doesn't have one. And this is also why Circle of Life and Death is really popular right now. As far as I'm aware, it doesn't lower the duration on Adaptive Swarm, but I could be completely wrong, so leave a comment if I am incorrect about that, and let me know, and I'll pin it if that's the case. But basically, you run Circle of Life and Death because it reduces the amount of time that you have, like the amount of downtime that you have. So the amount of time where we're casting abilities like Swipe or Shred on a boss, and instead we get to fill that downtime with just constant reapplication of our dots and our Adaptive Swarm and more just potent abilities, because now instead of, you know, me pressing Sunfire, Moonfiring everything, I Adaptive Swarm, and then now look, I already need to refresh my Sunfire, so I refresh it again, I go in, I rake a couple targets, and then it's like, oh, now I need to refresh my Moonfire. Whereas if I wasn't running Circle of Life and Death, right now I would probably be bored because I wouldn't need to reapply these dots like constantly, like my Rake and my Sunfire and my Moonfire, because they would have such longer durations. So I would just be casting things like Swipe and Shred on targets as like a filler. So running Circle of Life and Death allows us to have less downtime and more uptime on like the more potent abilities that we have access to. Oh, I don't really know why I'm attacking that. I guess out of boredom. Pull this one over here. I just bark skin myself since I'm getting hit, and then I'll Adaptive Swarm myself. It looks like... okay, we're just going into this pull. I don't know if we're pulling this into the boss or not. It looks like we are. Kind of doing it a bit awkwardly. That's okay. Walk in. We dot the boss. I'm going to focus a little bit on healing here at the start because it can get a little bit chaotic with all these mobs, and especially the relics doing passive damage to us. We have Adaptive Swarm back up, so I'll just cast that on myself. Not going to spend too much time thinking about it. I'm instead just going to focus on pressing it and getting back to doing what I'm supposed to be doing, which is managing my dots and hots. Oh, we almost got feared there. Got to stay a little bit ahead of this circle. And now we have a lot of downtime because we have active and a lot of the mobs are dead. So this is where Adaptive Swarm just fell off of the boss. So I'm immediately going to refresh with my own Adaptive Swarm on him. And so what happens now is now another Adaptive Swarm is going to fall off of him. But now a player that got the Adaptive Swarm, now theirs is going to bounce to the boss immediately. So now we just get in this like infinite cycle of the boss losing Adaptive Swarm and then regaining it immediately. So did you see that right there? It went to 0 seconds on the duration, and then it just immediately went back on him. And now it just refreshed again, so I can apply this Adaptive Swarm to myself, and then exactly the same thing's going to happen. He's going to lose Adaptive Swarm, and then shortly after gain it again. And it just, you want to just kind of rinse and repeat that cycle over and over. And get as much uptime on Adaptive Swarm on the boss as possible. Shroud here. Are in combat. We got to be careful. We're in combat, we're in combat, we're in combat. Unlucky. Oh, and I got pulled out of stealth too. Yeah, I'm in combat too. All stealth and res. Oh, that one person already released. All res. That was just the loyal Stoneborn. When it comes out of like its friendliness with the party from the Venthyr ability, it will make everybody get into combat because it turns into like a hostile mob. I thought those imps aggroed me for a second. My heart sank. Wait, oh my god, he pulled again, so the relics hit me. Oh, and now the Shaman could have rezzed me. That's so awful. Oh, the Warlock released again. Not like this. This time I guess we'll wait for the Warlock to die or do whatever he's gonna do. Because whenever the relics pull, it pulls us out of stealth, so... I'm gonna repair while he figures out what he wants to do. Okay, looks like he's stealthing through, so I think we're okay now. Looks like we are all right to go through. I have a bad pat, so we're not gonna be able to grab that Stoneborn, I don't think. Yeah, I'm not gonna worry about it. Thing here, we lost a lot of our Adaptive Swarms because of all that nonsense, but that's okay. We use Adaptive Swarm on the boss here. Here we'll do a bit of healing, because this is where it's important to do healing on this boss fight. I will dispel the person who's getting targeted by that ability. Oh, looks like the rogue got hit, so we're going to make sure the rogue stays nice and healthy. And now we have Adaptive Swarm back up. It just fell off the boss, so I'm just going to reapply it to the boss. And now we have enough time to reapply some dots. Just gonna dispel myself here. I can keep reapplying stuff. And Adaptive Swarm, he just got his refresh, so I'm gonna just cast it on myself. And then now we're gonna start hopefully working into that loop of the boss just continually having it. Obviously we're very late to the party, but that is okay. And there it went on the boss again. Try to get a food buff while we're waiting for all this. Oh no, you're getting combat because the relics. Activate my tree form right here while we're kind of waiting for everything to come out. I will use Vortex for the Houndmasters that jump away, and in case the tank wants to kite at all. Throw an Adaptive Swarm out. Should have done that a lot sooner. That should have been like my first ability cast as an Adaptive Swarm. And ideally, even when the tank like goes in there to start pulling all the mobs is when I use Adaptive Swarm on the tank. because then it'll start like bouncing to the mobs as he's bringing them outside. So they'll already have a decent amount of stacks by the time they get outside. And we have Adaptive Swarm again. I'll just cast it on myself because a lot of the mobs are dying. Back up. We'll use it on the tank this time. We're through. Here we're gonna have Adaptive Storm back up again. I'll use it on Vi. Because these are one stack ones, so that means they're just gonna disappear. They're not gonna bounce to anything. If it only has one stack remaining, it will not go on the next target, like it won't bounce. It just expires at that point. So that would be an exception where it's totally okay to refresh, is if something has one stack. So here I'll just use it on myself. Try to start building that loop early on. Refresh my dots on the boss, because that's what's going to be the most important in doing damage, is first having Adaptive Swarm on the target, and then keeping all of my bleeds and dots on the boss as long as possible, and have as much uptime as we can on those high hitting abilities. Here it's back up, so I'll use it on the boss again, because we have a little while before these ones bounce. Have it back up again, it's going to bounce off the boss, so I'm just going to throw a new one right back on the boss. Keep that uptime going. Refresh dots. Falls off the boss again, but immediately gets put back on by somebody else's. And then here the boss has it, so I'll just throw it on the tank. And then now we're going to go into this next room and hopefully have a decent amount of Adaptive Swarms that are going to bounce off onto these Tormented Souls and whatnot. So for the Tormented Souls, it's a little tricky on how you're supposed to do the most damage, technically. Healing should be your first priority as usual, but I think just throwing out Sunfires and the occasional Moonfire is going to be your best option for doing damage. If you want to help with a specific section, then that's where it comes into play, where you can use like Catform abilities and like apply all your dots and bleeds to the mobs. So like here, for instance, up in this corner, the mobs aren't being fixated very well, so I'm going to go into Catform and just press Rake on each of them. By now it's too late because the boss already hit them, but that's kind of the general idea you could take. You could see where the majority of your DPS players are playing, and then if you see one section in particular of the rows, like the seat rows, not being killed, then you can focus your attention on that and instead, like, you know, use Sunfire, Moonfire, and Rake. In comparison to where if you're kind of just trying to generally hit everything and do damage to all the mobs, then you're just using Sunfire and some Moonfires on the ones that are like higher health than others. Adaptive Swarm is going to go on the boss, so here we just throw Adaptive Swarm on somebody else, just use it on the monk. And then we go out here, and hopefully by the time we get out here, it's literally just going to throw an Adaptive Swarm almost immediately on this boss, depending on the timing. So yeah, the one from the tank is hopefully going to go on the boss. It might go on the relics, but there we go. We got one on the boss. And here, it's going to refresh on the boss, I think. There we go. So I just threw a new one on myself. And then once this one falls off the boss, mine will bounce onto the boss. Oh, got hit by that frontal. Good thing it's a 15. That was my bad. And now we have so this is where it's really important to be pressing your Adaptive Swarm as much as you can, because this is where you can really take advantage of getting like an extra swarm or two out there, which can make all the difference in how, you know, consistent the refreshes are. Just stand in the way here. F-Flow, Arc Skin. Then we'll kind of heal up the Shaman, Swift Mend, followed by a Regrowth for a big heal. Right into another phase. I'm going to wait to reapply my Cat Bleeds. And there we go. We reapply those. We reapply our regular dots. We reapply Adaptive Swarm. Iron Bark the Shaman this time because he doesn't have a defensive. And I do a lot of extra healing to myself because of Endurance Conduits, so I don't need to worry about myself too much here. Heart of the Wild. Try to build up some combo points so I can get a big rip. Reapply my dots first. And then at this point we just Ferocious Bite because the boss is already dead. And that's it. Oh, almost 3 chests with that. That was pretty good. And I would say the damage is definitely pretty decent. 5.5k overall DPS and a plus 15 for a Grievous week is definitely decent. And that's the other thing is the more you keep up with Adaptive Swarm, even on something like a Grievous week, it's going to help naturally with Grievous because this adds another hot to your group and it also is doing healing. So it's going to help a lot with Grievous if you can manage using Adaptive Swarm as much as possible. So hopefully that was helpful. Thanks for watching. And next up, we'll probably talk about Night Fae and playing Balance Affinity and just how to, judge when you can do damage and stuff like that. So, yeah.